Hello and welcome to today's episode in our new HG and employment series. My name is Faye and I'm the fundraising officer at Pregnancy Sickness Support. Before joining the PSS team full-time, I was a peer support volunteer for 2.5 years. I was employed as a lingerie designer during both my HG pregnancies with my girls now 7 and 3. HG is a condition at the severe end of the pregnancy sickness spectrum, which requires medical treatment to ensure the health and well-being of the mother and the baby. With HG, the nausea and vomiting is so severe that the sufferer loses a considerable amount of weight and becomes dehydrated and depleted of nutrients. It can have a profound effect on the woman's ability to function in carrying out even the simplest of daily tasks, and it is not uncommon for women suffering from HG to need help caring for themselves. At PSS, we are frequently contacted by women who are unable to work because of their HG. Although many employers are sympathetic to women suffering from the condition, we find that many employers are unaware of the impact that HG can have on a woman's ability to carry out even the most basic of tasks, let alone her usual paid employment. Today, I'm joined by Alex and Rhiannon from Maternity Action. Thank you so much for joining me today, guys. How are you? Great. Rhiannon, let's get started. Can you tell me a little bit about the work that Maternity Action does?
Sure. So Maternity Action, it's the UK's maternity rights charity dedicated to promoting, protecting and enhancing the rights of all pregnant women, new mothers and their families to sort of employment, social security and healthcare. And so we do that through sort of 4 advice services, which are staffed by our in-house employment and immigration lawyers. So we've got a maternity rights advice service, and that's delivering telephone and email advice to pregnant women and new parents on their employment rights, maternity pay, benefits, and on their breastfeeding rights. And obviously that's covering things like health and safety and maternity pay and all sorts of things. And we have our employment casework service, which is Alex and I are both in the casework service here at Maternity Action, and that's delivered in partnership with Yes Law, and we're providing free legal casework and peer support to sort of on more complex cases which come through our advice lines, but we'll touch on that a bit later on in terms of just its additional support on employment issues that pregnant women are experiencing and new mothers and their families at work. We've also got a maternity care access advice service as well, and that's delivering advice and casework on charging for NHS care to migrant and asylum seeking women, and that's sort of helping midwives and their advisors as well. And there's also a migrant women's rights service, and that's providing advice and training to midwives and the voluntary sector on things like housing, income and healthcare for migrant, refugee and asylum seeking women. Alongside those 4 services, there's also an active programme of sort of research and policy and campaigning on employment, social security and healthcare. And, you know, one of our big campaigns at the moment is shared parental leave and the issues there, and also, you know, issues that arose in relation to health and safety in work for pregnant women. And so just generally, you know, campaigning to end maternity discrimination and to end charging for NHS maternity care and the harsh impact of the sort of current hostile environments that, you know, we're experiencing in various policies. And just generally, you know, those all link into the sort of poverty and destitution that we see amongst pregnant women and new mothers, and the sort of trying to reduce those health inequalities which exist. So that's a sort of very broad brush, sort of very quick description of all the very in-depth, you know, work that we're doing here at Maternity Action.
And Alex, can you explain a little bit about what your role as a caseworker involves?
So Rhiannon and I are both employment solicitors in our casework team, as she mentioned. The casework service is unique in that at Maternity Action, we actually have an integrated end-to-end advice and casework support service for pregnant women and new mothers who are facing problems at work. So we're all qualified solicitors who operate these services. We have our own clients, so each client has one of us as a contact. And as Rhiannon said, the casework service is there to help women who need that more intense support. So it's provided by us at Maternity Action and also with our partner charity, Yes Law. And we can help with all sorts of things, which include drafting emails, preparing for meetings, advising on next steps and options. Sometimes we'll write to an employer on a client's behalf if that would help case. We can take further action if needed. So how is it accessed? It's accessed through the Maternity Rights Advice line, and we'll give you the contact details for that a little bit later on this session. Unfortunately, we don't take self-referrals, but we do try and help as many people as we possibly can through our casework.
Brilliant. I mean, obviously we talked a little bit at the top of this episode about how debilitating HG can be and how isolating it is, and you know, sufferers really feel alone and it's a lot to deal with. Then bundle on top of that the difficulties you could be having trying to work and the treatment you're receiving at work, and it's really rather a lot to handle. So Rhiannon, how should a person who's pregnant, and suffering from HG, how should they expect to be treated by their employer?
So it's a good question, because I think, as you say, it's that period in your life when, you know, there's so much going on and you're trying to deal with a lot of, you know, different situations, and, you know, dealing with your employer as part of that isn't often easy. But I think in terms of just a starting point, it's just, you know, keeping that dialogue going with the employer. If you have a good relationship with them, and if not, otherwise it's just being open and honest, I think, in terms of what's going on in relation to that pregnancy related ill health that you're experiencing. Alex will come on to discuss the various rights, but obviously unless an employer knows that you're pregnant, then pregnancy rights don't kick in terms of, you know, you need to let your employer know technically, otherwise things like pregnancy discrimination, you know, doesn't exist because they don't know. But, you know, equally it's about putting forward solutions to your employer. You know, if you're, you know, in terms of the HG, you know, whether there's, you know, certain periods of it where you might feel better and more able to be back in work, what can that look like? Can adjustments be made? You know, can there be a return to work, or does it need to be phased? Does, you know, are you better off at certain times of the day? It's just about, I think, keeping that dialogue going with your employer to say, I'd like to be back in work. You know, what's manageable for me in that sort of situation. So I think it's far better an approach to just keep in mind that it's an employer that needs to know what's going on and to help you manage that work so far as it's possible. But I think in terms of just general treatment and what, you know, legal rights can be relied on, you know, you've got the same rights to paid sick leave as any other employee. I think one important thing to bear in mind is that if you're off work at around 36 weeks of pregnancy because of pregnancy related ill health, then an employer can start maternity leave at that point, but you can't be forced onto maternity leave by your employer at any time before that date. That's a personal choice. The earliest you can start maternity leave is at week 29 of pregnancy. But otherwise, if you're ill during pregnancy, then it's important to just follow the employer's normal sickness reporting procedures. And it's, you know, just look at what that says in the contract or policy and follow it. And also make sure that the employer has it noted that it's a pregnancy related illness that's on your sickness absence and that's linked to your pregnancy or loss of pregnancy. And if you're not sure about what should be put on that, you know, what your condition is, and obviously if it's HG, to just make sure that that's what's noted on your sick note from the GP and discuss that with your GP in terms of what could be put on that note and corresponding with your employer. And as I said earlier, obviously you're only going to be protected against pregnancy discrimination if your sick note states that it's sick, your sick leave is pregnancy related. So really important to get that out there. Obviously, if you don't wish to disclose your pregnancy, and there's obviously a raft of reasons why, you know, you might not want to, then again, it's important to discuss that at that point with your GP and midwife, and to just understand what that might have in terms of your rights at that point, to obviously come to maternity action for more rights. But obviously, unless your employer knows that you're pregnant, then it's difficult to enforce things like your rights around discrimination. So yeah, as I mentioned, it's recording that pregnancy-related sickness absence separately from any other form of sick leave, because it just means that you can't be disadvantaged as a result of that absence from work. You know, and your employer can't take disciplinary action or dismissal, you know, based on the fact that you've been absent for a period of time, and obviously it can be long-lasting, that absence. So it's, again, it has to be noted as the pregnancy-related sickness. And then otherwise, it's obviously you're entitled to the same sick pay as other employees. You can't be disadvantaged because it's a pregnancy-related illness. So again, check your contract. Is there contractual pay there that means that you should be getting that? Speak to HR if you're not sure. And if there is contractual sick pay that's enhanced sick pay, then you are entitled to that regardless of the fact that you're pregnant. So again, it's really important to check that you are being treated in the same way as other employees. And otherwise, some contracts have a contractual sick pay for a period of time, and then it might fall back down onto statutory sick pay, or otherwise you might start on, it may just be statutory sick pay that you're entitled to. So again, check that. But if your employer refuses to pay you any form of sick pay, again, there may be claims for unauthorized deduction of wages or pregnancy discrimination if they're not paying you during that time money that you're entitled to. And again, get advice as soon as possible if you feel that's happening to you. I think one important thing that we sort of often find in terms of some of the women that we're advising when they've been off on sick leave for a period of weeks or even months is this issue with statutory maternity pay. And I don't think we have time today to go into statutory maternity pay and the qualifying conditions, but that's all on our website. But generally, it's important to bear in mind that if you're on sick pay, and especially statutory sick pay, it can reduce your earnings significantly and might mean that you then don't qualify for statutory maternity pay. So the important time frame to bear in mind is roughly weeks 18 to 26 of pregnancy is when your calculation period for statutory maternity pay is in play. And that's when you need to maximize your earnings. So then I think in terms of going back to this, talking to your employer, it's important to discuss with your employer, perhaps using some annual leave in that period of time to make sure that your earnings are sort of higher than the £123 a week average earnings, which is the minimum amount for qualifying for statutory maternity pay. So I think that's my sort of final point on being, this sort of thing to bear in mind with being, taking or being off on sick leave in weeks 18 to 26 can have that impact on your statutory maternity pay. And that's something, that can suddenly crop up after that calculation period has gone by and there's nothing you can do about it. In that sort of situation, there are exceptions, but I won't get into that now. But yes, just remember weeks 18 to 26 to think about other forms of leave if you can, and to discuss that with your employer.
We've obviously talked about quite a lot then, Rhiannon, so all that information can be found on your website, can't it? We've kept the lines of communication open and we've followed all of your advice there, Rhiannon, but still we don't think we're being treated fairly. Alex, what can a person do in that situation?
Well, I think the first step for somebody to do is to just find out what their rights are. So again, signposting back to our website, we do have lots of information on our website which covers all aspects of maternity and parental rights and benefits. Specifically though, the Equality Act has some specific protection against discrimination because of pregnancy or a pregnancy related illness, and that applies during the protected period for somebody, which is throughout pregnancy until the end of the maternity leave period, which is up to 52 weeks or sooner if somebody returns to work sooner. As Rhiannon mentioned, in most cases, you need to show that you told your employer about your pregnancy or that they've become aware of it. And if you're not an employee or you're not entitled to maternity leave, perhaps because you're an agency worker, then the protected period will end from 2 weeks after the date that you've given birth. So in terms of legal protection, you may have a claim for unfair dismissal, or automatic unfair dismissal, or pregnancy discrimination, perhaps if you're dismissed because of your pregnancy, or if there's pregnancy-related sickness absence, which has caused one of those reasons. You need 2 years service to claim unfair dismissal, but you're protected against automatic unfair dismissal and discrimination from day one of your employment, regardless of how many hours you work each week. And casual workers, so agency workers and contract workers, are also protected against discrimination as well. I appreciate there's a lot of information that I've just given you, and it's such a big area, so I don't want to go into it too much now because we could talk all day about it, but there's a lot of information on our website, and it's all broken down into really easily digestible information sheets. And again, we can tell you how to access those later on. Our approach is always to raise any issues informally first, letting an employer know that you believe you shouldn't be treated in this way. And often it's a case that an employer is just not actually aware of what your rights are as a pregnant person. So it's important perhaps to signpost your employer to where they themselves can access the information about how you should be treated and what your rights are. In terms of who to speak to, as Rhiannon said, first port of call is usually to your manager or to HR, and it's focusing on solutions and what you want to achieve rather than what has gone wrong. If speaking to a manager or HR hasn't worked, then perhaps you could think about whether to speak to somebody more senior within the organisation. If you're finding it difficult to talk to a manager, then perhaps sending an email or writing a letter might help you to communicate what the issues are. But finally, as a last resort, if things haven't resolved through talking and trying to raise it informally, then raising a concern through more formal methods like a grievance process can be something that you can think about. But what we always say is that it's usually very difficult to remain conciliatory once you've actually taken the step to raise a grievance, because it can often sour a relationship between you and your employer. And often there are lots of different things at play when you're pregnant and considering a period of maternity leave. So there's lots of different factors to think about. If things aren't resolved, then there are strict time limits for issuing any claims in an employment tribunal, and those time limits are usually enforced. So it's important to know what those time limits are and have those in the back of your mind. But it's also very important to get further legal advice if you are considering bringing a claim in the employment tribunal. And again, lots of information about that on our website.
I hope in most cases that it doesn't have to get to that level that you've just mentioned there, Alex, with the process that you need to go through in raising a grievance. But I think one thing that you've just said then that just sort of pinged in my brain as, oh, that would have been helpful for you, Faye, is when I was being signed off, I was being signed off for a week at a time, and I'd never had HG before. So when the doctor said to me, oh, I think it'd be better next week, Faye, I sort of believed them. It didn't occur to me that could be going week upon week upon week. And I was trying to speak to my boss on the phone, and actually where you've just said then, why don't you write a letter or an email? That would have been much better for me than trying to have that conversation either on the phone or face to face, because you're able then, aren't you, to consolidate your thoughts and be a bit more articulate, especially if you're struggling to use a phone or even to get out of bed. So I think that's absolutely wonderful advice. Thank you so much for joining me today. Before we finish our call, could you guys tell us where we can find Maternity Action and how we can get in touch?
So obviously our website, it's maternityaction.org.uk, and then it's quite clear signposting to our advice, so accessing advice. But one thing obviously is our advice is all free of charge, whether that's the advice lines or if you're then put through to our casework service as well. And that's end-to-end free legal advice from qualified solicitors, which is unique as a sort of charity providing that level of legal support here. But I think that the best place to start off with is our information sheets, and there's a lot of information there which is easily accessible. There's a lot of frequently asked questions, so it's set out with a sort of a question, and then in terms of I'm suffering from pregnancy related ill health, what are my rights, or it's all set out very clearly there. So we have a limited number of advisors, so obviously people might struggle to get through to our advice lines, but we have 2 different advice lines, a national advice line, which is open Monday to Friday, 10 until 1 p.m. each day. And that is 0808 802 0029. And we also have a dedicated London advice line, which is open Monday, Tuesday, Thursday and Friday, and that's also 10 a.m. until 1 p.m. And so you can use that line if you live in London or work in a London borough, and that's also 0808 802 0057. And we also have email advice, which is done through a contact form, which you can access via the website. And again, that's got a sort of limited capacity on it, but again, you know, we do answer those emails, and some people might prefer written advice, and so that's there as an option as well. But otherwise, yeah, head to the website maternityaction.org.uk and start from there in terms of our information sheets, and then how to get further advice if you think a phone call could help.
That's brilliant. Thank you so much for joining me today. That information was incredible, and I'm sure it's going to be really helpful for a lot of people. If you or someone you care about is suffering from HG, please visit pregnancysicknesssupport.org.uk for information on our services, as well as details on how you can get involved with volunteering or fundraising.